Welcome everyone. We've got a double header this morning, back-to-back OT ICS, so I hope you get really excited for that kind of stuff. First up, we're going to have Bruce, but just remember, like, if you do want to do questions, he's going to have some time for Q&A, which would be quite good. If you can do the questions through the app, that makes my life way easier, because I can come up and speak them through, and you can write it down halfway through the talk, so then it's ready for the Q&A at the end. But without further ado, I want to introduce Bruce Large. I think I would say OT superstar, and I believe it's cyber hype guy.
Yes.
So Bruce has previously been my hype man, so I will do my very best to try to be my own hype guy for Bruce. And I'm trying, but it'll never be the same. So can I get a really big round of applause for Bruce?
Hey, thank you, Colby. Let's give it up for Colby. Hey, very good. Hey, thank you all for coming. I think some people are still coming in. So yeah, for those of you who don't know, I am Bruce Large, B Large on X. Also go by the nickname of BFL. So I'm actually the Chief Evangelist and Principal OT Cybersecurity Architect at SOCI. We're an OT cybersecurity startup. I've worked in IT and OT in network and system engineering and cybersecurity roles for 15 years. I'm actually a chartered engineer and a registered professional engineer of Queensland, RPEQ. And I'm a very proud, passionate Queensland president of the Professional Engineers, and we're a proud member of the Professionals Australia. We're actually a union for STEM workers, so we have a tech, software, and information technology group. So if you're interested in joining the comrades, please come see me. It's an exciting time for our industry. I also have a volunteering problem. I'm the Deputy Chair of the Australian Information Security Association Queensland branch, and I'm also the lead of the ASA SecArc SIG. Show of hands, who's been to a SecArc SIG event? I'm pretty sure, I thought you'd been to one. Jared? Okay, so it looks like none. In my defense, it's very bright up here. So if you're in Brisbane and you're an ASA member and you're interested to learn more about security architecture, you should come along. It's really, really good. And we actually have an event on the 29th of May. Show of hands, who's from QUT? Hey, so yeah, University for the Real World. I have a Bachelor of Engineering in Telecommunications and, oh, there goes the screen, and Applied Finance. Also, I have a lot of certs. So SABSA, maybe show of hands, who's done a SABSA course? Yep. Yeah, so I'm SABSA Foundation. I've done my A3, but I still have to do the paper. And I was actually the initial chair of the APAC liaison group. I'm a SANS fanboy, so I have the GICSP, the GRID, and the GSOM, and an aspiring SANS instructor. I have my 62443 Certified Expert cert, and the ALC Cybersecurity Foundation Practitioner cert. So I did that when I was at PwC. It's actually a really great course, kind of combines CISP, CISM, SABSA, and just a really great course for people that are new to security consulting. So I kind of wanted to start with like, why this presentation, right? So I've been on many security programs, I've consulted on security programs, I've delivered security programs, and I just wanted to kind of share some of the tips and tricks and tools that I've used. And last night, having a few beers, I was explaining this is what my life feels like. So, just going down the ship that's on fire and on chaos. So agenda for today. So program methodologies and what works. Talking about sponsors and how to work with sponsors. Our stakeholder management with OT teams, which is very, very important. A comparison of OT security frameworks and how to use them. Touch on change management and knowledge management, and break into Q&A. So, program methodologies and what works. So, who here has done any project management training? Very good. So, we have projects, right? These are kind of like things that we're very familiar with. Defined packages of work and should be producing a known outcome, known budget, known time. Projects will fit into a program, so where we have interdependent projects and we have scheduling, we have resource dependencies, we wrap into a program. And programs and projects will exist within portfolios. So projects produce defined outputs, right? And a program will build or deliver outcomes, and portfolios are responsible for benefits. And the really key point here are benefits are measurable, right? Another way to look at this, we'll have multiple outputs from projects. they all feed into capabilities. Capabilities will influence outcomes. These outcomes will deliver benefits. They can also deliver disbenefits. So a disbenefit is like, for example, there's a new project and resources in my team get allocated to another team. The team getting the resources have a benefit and I have a disbenefit. So just an anti-benefit. And ultimately, these all help us achieve org outcomes. So often as security practitioners, we're trying to make security better, and that's a complex process. Sometimes it's difficult to know what to do, how to sequence, how projects work together. So by wrapping programs, we're able to get that flexibility to figure out what needs to be done when and how they interrelate. Has anyone done MSP training, managing successful programs? Oh, one hand, excellent, very good. So MSP, Axelos, so they're the guys that do Prince2, ITIL, all that kind of stuff, have a framework. Importantly, it has this idea of like principles, themes, processes. But I'd say if you are either working as a security program manager or are related on security program, and you're trying to find a good reference for things like target operating models or blueprints or like benefits management, those kind of things, MSP is an excellent resource. I think it's the 5th edition that I have, and I've read the 4th edition previously. Now, importantly, if you're really stuck and you don't know where to go, the C2M2 is a really, really great framework. So the Cybersecurity Capability Maturity Model, it's a US Department of Energy standard. It's a really good framework if you're trying to figure out, like, it's day one, I don't really know what to do. And it has this really good concept of crawl, walk, and run. So crawl is MIL 1, maturity indicator level 1, walk, MIL 2, and run, MIL 3. So we'll touch on some of the structure of C2M2 further in the preso when we talk about AES CSF, but it has domains, in this case the program domain, and objectives. So the first objective is establishing a cybersecurity program strategy, and it's built MIL 1, MIL 2, MIL 3. Might be a bit hard to read, but I'm going to put my slides up on GitHub, so feel free to grab them. Or even if you just Google C2M2 version 2.1. So MIL 1, things are very much ad hoc, right? So you try it, it's not formalized, but you give it a good go. MIL 2, we start to document things, right? We'll have standards, we have the right resources, we have the right stakeholder management. MIL 3 is things like policy, how we do audits, how we can prove that people have competence, and a few other characteristics. But importantly here, MIL 1, we've tried to build a strategy. MIL 2, we really start getting into machinery of, like, we have goals and objectives, we have a strategy, we have priorities, we have strategic objectives, important things like program oversight, standards and guidelines we'll be using, and ideally mapping back into industry requirements. So it's a US standard, so NERC CIP, TSA pipeline, US-based standards, things like PCI DSS if you're a retailer, whatnot. And at MIL 3, your program strategy is living, it's updated periodically, and it will change when there's significant org change. So the strategy kind of sets out, hey, like, this is what's important, this is how we do it. For us, it's really about how we establish and maintain our security program, right? So again, MIL 1, things are ad hoc, but at MIL 2, importantly, we've built our program according to the strategy. We have senior management sponsorship, they're visible, they're doing stuff. The responsibilities are being allocated to people who actually have the authority to do things. And then at MIL 3, it's more specific, but it's also thinking it's things like policy-driven, people with competence, things like that. So it talks here about periodically reviewing the strategy, things like independent assurance, so having a third party come in to look at what you're doing, and things like how do you work with external entities. So my background used to be critical infrastructure, so done a lot of work with ACSC, organisations like that. So one of the key themes I want to pull out here is your program is absolutely dependent on your sponsor, which is the next slide on how to work with sponsors. So maybe a show of hands, who in the room has actually been a project sponsor before? Richard, yeah, nice one, Richard. Did you enjoy it? No. Exactly. So mate, get out your notebook, you might enjoy some of this. So the role of the sponsor. So first and foremost, it's a critical but challenging role, right? Now, I see often sponsors think the project manager is kind of the one that will get shot. And yes, that is true, but it's your reputation that will get burnt on the way, right? So you both have the accountability for the success of the program, but importantly, the consequences for failure, right? So friends of mine have been sponsors before. They've found it difficult because a sponsor is a part-time person in a project, right? The project manager and the project team are in it full-time, probably focused on one, maybe two projects. A sponsor has their day job, and they might have 2 or 3 projects, they might even have a program. So for them, they have to put a lot of trust, right? And that's super important because it has to be a partnership between your sponsor and your program manager. If you're fighting each other, it's just not going to work well. And too often, I would say sponsors just aren't really clear on their role, and they haven't had training, and for them, it's a whole new world. But for project managers and program managers, like, they're in it all the time, right? And as I said before, absolutely critical, your sponsor must be visible and engaged, right? If your program hasn't got a visible sponsor, people will think the company's not, invested in this, they're not doing it genuinely, and you'll really struggle to get the buy-in, especially if you have difficult stakeholders, right? So I think one of the main reasons that the sponsors and project managers have issues is really about communication. So personally, I'm quite a visual communicator. I was ex-PwC, we're the mark of the beast, don't hold that against me. But I enjoy communicating with graphs, right? Did some really great training. It's actually open. If you go to Coursera, you can look up the PwC data approach. But the key is, if you're a stakeholder and you're in an audit committee or you're on a steerco, you might have to read like a 200-300 page briefing pack, right? If you can communicate visually, so you can use, like graphs, red, amber, greens, gauges, those kind of things, and quickly communicate intent, you'll have a way better outcome, right? Because you can imagine sponsors, business people, really busy, and they don't always have the time to have as much preparation as is required. Or they might be conversational. They might be like me. They just want to have a yarn, just have a chat. Tell me, Brucey, how bad is it? Red again, I see. Fantastic. But don't worry, we're working hard. We'll make it work. But sometimes it's an informal thing, right? And if you've done more projects with the sponsor, you'll start building a bond. Or my favourite, as an engineer, we're very difficult, detail-orientated people. So, we will collect the receipts and ask, hey, why did that move? Because that hasn't moved for 3 weeks, but now that we're supposed to be doing the thing, it's now moving. What's going on? So I guess, has anyone here done a disk profile before? Yeah. So I quite like it. I think I'm an I from memory. But one cool thing we did when I was at Stanwell is we actually did a communication preference session. So we had like a team building day, because there's a lot of change happening in the energy industry. So there's only 5 questions, and you had like kind of a quadrant that was basically task-orientated or people-orientated, and in the other direction, introvert, extrovert. You may be wondering, I'm a raging extrovert, thank you. I'm also people-orientated, but I enjoy tech, so I'm a weird person anyway. So what was cool is we all did our assessments, and in the room, we actually split the room into quadrants, and we all stood in our quadrants. And it was a super effective way to understand, this is what I need to do to communicate with my team. So I'd actually suggest to everyone, maybe go back to the office and have a chat around communication. If you have a team building day, it really helps, because often the challenges you have with people are just because, you're talking, they're listening, but the message isn't getting through. So one for you, Richard, The Courageous Sponsor. I don't know if you've read this before. Phenomenal book. So I actually did a webinar with Annie, and I was joking to Colby before, look at all this space. I'm going to go for a walk. I even have more screens down here. But no, The Courageous Sponsor, Annie Sheehan. So she did a webinar, so I'm a member of Project Management Institute Queensland, the PMIQ. Did a webinar with the team, and it was fantastic. Book takes about 2.5 hours to read, so it's quite accessible. Defines things about like how projects work, role expectations, like what is a sponsor versus a project manager. Importantly, project terminology, right? Not everyone is familiar. And unfortunately, we have different terms for similar things. This is one thing I really like though. They define sponsors in terms of birds. So first up is peacocks. Now peacocks haven't even picked up this book, right? They're just narcissists who get projects and eventually the company goes, you're probably not a good fit and you need to leave. So the first rung she talks about are magpies. So magpies are just generally aggressive. I mean, we've all been swooped by magpies. Not really into the detail. They kind of work the way they normally work, but they don't know how to work within a project context. Another important thing they talk about in the book is sponsors tend to be really high-performing, goal-orientated, outcomes-driven people. Their standards might not be the standards of the project team, and if they're pushing people really hard, it might just really break down, morale in the unit. So magpies are normally where a high-performing manager lands in a project and doesn't really know how to deal with the team. The next person is an ostrich. So the ostrich is the person who goes, this is all on fire, and I'll just put my head in the sand and hopefully it fixes itself. I know these people. I'm not one of them, but I do know these people. And unfortunately, they think they need more information to make a decision. They delay more. The project gets more off course, and it just gets more and more difficult to recover. The duck is for people who are kind of new to project management and are really keen to learn, right? So it's all nice and smooth on the top and just chaos under the water. So they're leaning in, they're trying to learn stuff, and they're really, really teachable, right? Eagles are people that we all should be aiming for. So an eagle kind of understands projects, can have a bit of a look ahead. They kind of use the term that they're, soaring, and when they see an issue, they can swoop in and fix it. So yeah, probably the call to action is to get to that kind of eagle level. And once you've been an eagle for probably, 5, 10 projects for like 5 years, you become an owl, you can start mentoring other sponsors. But just a really nice kind of fun persona thing. And then in the book, she talks about the skills ladder to move between those levels. So I encourage everyone, if you're a project member and you can see a sponsor who's struggling, or a project manager that's just really hasn't got the time to kind of coach their sponsor, this is a really great book. It's only 2.5 hours. I actually bought a copy for someone I used to work with as a parting gift. I was like, I'm not trying to throw shade, but you should read this book. And they've actually had a read of it, and they were like, Bruce, this is really good. So yeah, big shout out to Annie. So stakeholder management for OT teams. Now, this presentation is quite general, but this is where it really digs into OT, right? So first off, just stakeholder management is absolutely vital for program success, right? So who here has ever built a stakeholder analysis matrix? Yeah, good one, yep. So basically, pretty simple concept, but it's how much do they care about your project and how much can they destroy your project? So if they care and they can destroy it, they need to be informed and you need to bring them on the journey. And you need to flex your communication to them. If they don't care and they can't wreck the project, just send them a status update, right? And if they're in this middle zone, just flex to the level of comms needed. So yeah, I think it's super important that if they have the ability to disrupt your project or program, you really have to make sure they're informed and know what's happening. So just general tips for working with OT stakeholders. So first and foremost, go to site. We kind of use the term walk the line, like put on the high vis, go out. I mean, everyone in OT loves talking about OT. I enjoy talking about spinny things, fiery things, wet things. It's really important that you actually show some interest. And generally, people are really proud to talk about their OT systems, right? And if you're going to head to site, spend a day, do some preparation, right? If you have previous risk assessments, go read them. Understand if the risks have been treated. If there's any internal reports, maybe there's like an asset management strategy. Really, really helpful for you to understand what's happening on the site. Obviously, a big fan of SANS. If you go Google SANS ICS posters, lots of really good resources. One of those is the ICS site visit plan. So it kind of goes through some tips. I think it's like a 4-page PDF that you can print. But importantly, it kind of gives you some really good tips on how to make the most of your time if you go to site. So first off, just doing some OS ints. Some engineers, they don't really understand like security. It's not really their kind of day job. But, I'm sure most of us in the room have fired up Shodan and found things on the internet that shouldn't be on the internet. Those are really good conversations, right? I've had many stakeholders who say, well, yeah, we put it on the internet, but who's going to find it? Well, there's a website called Shodan, and that will find it. And for some of them, it completely blows their mind, especially if you just drop in company name or subnet and just all the stuff you see, right? Everything on site, safety is super important, right? So the safety and security teams, as in physical security teams, they'll know problems, they'll have their own works in flight, and if you can kind of join all three together, it's a really good outcome. If you can and have permission, just try and have a poke at the edge and see what you can see. I've done that stuff before. It's just a good way to show people that it's not science fiction, it can happen. Plant floor cybersecurity discussions, so kind of like cyber toolbox talks, those kind of things. If you have an awareness program, great time to bring those materials out. I've personally done this in Mount Isa, just having a chat to everyone about why password security matters, why MFA matters, talking about kind of the Ukraine crash override, the pipe dream malware, that kind of stuff. For us, we live this. For them, it's actually a really cool opportunity for them just to have some space to ask questions. Actually, some really good stuff around how you don't wreck your body ergonomically when you try and do a site assessment. Some tips and tricks on doing traffic analysis, so taking a packet capture and running it through a tool just to see what's really there. And then finally, how do you actually keep all this for future reference, right? Some of this stuff's really useful, especially if you have a security incident, just to have that in a stored area that that you've put proper security measures around. So, kind of keen to have a chat about OT security frameworks and how to use them. So I'm sure everyone in the room knows the NIST CSF. I don't know if we all know the history of the NIST CSF. So it's a Barack Obama presidential executive order. So at the time, I can't remember the year, I think it's 2014 from memory, the Barack administration wanted to implement mandatory cybersecurity requirements for critical infrastructure, and they said no, because this will cost too much money. So the compromise was to create the NIST CSF, so at least there was a common language, right? The reason the NIST CSF is really, really popular is a lot of business, board members and managers are aware of it, and as you have people moving between boards, it's a common language, right? Now, NIST CSF version 2 dropped in February. Previously 5 functions, now a new function, the govern. So they've pulled things out of identify and whatnot and put it into a new function called govern. And I'm not sure, maybe show of hands, has anyone seen the implementation examples? Yeah, so I actually really like them now. I'm sure that's going to be hard to read, but what they do is for the category and subcategory, they actually have specific examples of good practice. And I think as an auditor, really, really useful, right? That you can actually have something tangible to show, hey, this is evidence of this category being met. So would encourage everyone, if you haven't, just jump on the NIST CSF website, under framework resources, there's a spreadsheet for implementation examples. And my favorite, it has a mapping to ISA IEC 62443, which is Security for Industrial Automation and Control Systems. So AES CSF, my graphic isn't working. So yeah, it was originally developed by the Cybersecurity Industry Working Group, led by the AEMO in 2018, and version 2 was released in 2021. I was actually part of the team that originally developed the AES CSF. It's a modification of the US C2M2, Cybersecurity Capability Maturity Model, but it adds the privacy domain, and it also adds anti-patterns. The framework consists of 11 domains, so for V2, 11 domains, 354 practices, and 42 anti-patterns. Oh, and my note to add framework picture. Good work, Bruce. And also practices map to what we call maturity indicator levels, as well as security profiles. So maturity indicator levels are part of C2M2, think crawl, walk, run, but security profiles are what the CSWIG, so combination of industry, AEMO, and the Australian Cybersecurity Centre thought were appropriate. In the initial AES CSF, the vision was, when you did your criticality assessment, low, medium, high, low mapped to security profile 1, medium security profile 2, high security profile 3. If you look at SOCI, Security Critical Infrastructure Act, the bare minimum is just SP1, which is actually pretty low. the domains are broken into what we call enterprise-wide, operational, and external parties. Enterprise-wide are really important for your security program, right? Things like architecture, your program, how you're doing risk, arguably probably the most important domain. Workforce. So workforce is quite tricky because it normally takes a long time, especially in heavy regulated industries, to make the change. And privacy. Operational domains are probably where we're more familiar. So things like asset, access, so assets, kind of knowing your assets, knowing logical assets, and also kind of IT system access. Access is around identity and how we enforce identity controls. Threat is both, threat is an cyber threat intelligence as well as vulnerabilities. So a big change in V2 was to combine the information sharing and the TVM domains. And situation is logging, a really cool thing, the common operational picture, which is quite good, but in V2 kind of just got renamed to just how do you share the current state of situational awareness. I know something Jared and I have spoken about, and response. So how we roll incident response, how we do business continuity, disaster recovery. And finally, third parties. So third parties is a big one. I've been involved with this a lot lately. So how do we just work with third parties to make sure they're doing good cybersecurity? And importantly, as asset owners, how are we not only asking them what to do, but also managing what they're doing? So maybe show of hands, who's ever done 62443 training? Yeah, excellent. I knew you would, Gary. Really good framework. I would say a complex framework that everyone gets confused with, right? So I'm actually a member of the ISA, International Society of Automation. Would encourage you, if you do operate OT, it's a really good organisation to join. Mostly because if you join, you can actually read the standards online for free. So that's a really good tip. But yeah, it's a framework of cybersecurity publications for industrial automation and control systems. It's also amazing being on the mailing thread where people are like, we regret this acronym, but it's too hard to change it. So ICS is broader than just normal industrial control systems. It considers the process and the people and the things around that. So yeah, it has 14 standards organised into kind of 4 levels. General's really kind of terms, getting everyone on the same page, and really those kind of like normative expectations of a standard series. Level 2 is policies and procedures, so this is whole of company, right? Level 3 is system-based, and level 4 is what we call components. So level 4 really just relies and talks to what vendors build, right? I don't know if people listen to, Cole Cornford's Galar Cyber Secured podcast. Yeah, so if you have a look, my episode dropped this morning with Cole. So we talk about AppSec for OT, so things like threat modeling. If you do work with vendors and you do pen tests and you're like, there's a lot of gaps here, I'd actually recommend point them to the 62443 series because it helps them build product security for operational technology. Personally, I'm mostly in the 2.1 and the 3.3 kind of space. So the standards were originally published as ISO 99 because ISO 99 is the working group, but now they're co-published with the International Electrotechnical Commission, which is a body that was formed probably 200 years ago to figure out what kind of plugs and cables are we going to use between France and England. But yeah, they're published as 62443. And the NIST CSF only refers to 2.1 and 3.3. So 2.1, actually, I'll get to that. So the other good thing about the standard is it actually has a certification program for processes, systems, and components. So a really important concept is a security level. And when you're a vendor and you create products, you can actually certify to a security level, which is what we call an SLC for a security level capability. And importantly for people, it has a process for training and certification. So ISA do their own certification, but other groups like Exida also do certification. Another little pro tip, there's normally sales on around Black Friday, so I'd suggest if you're keen to do it, keep an eye out for Black Friday sales. If you do the first training, you actually get copies of 1.1, 2.1, and 3.3. And if you do IC33, which is the risk assessment specialist, you get a early copy of 3.2, which is the risk management standard or risk assessment standard. And two of the most important concepts from 62443 that you should come across is something called a cybersecurity management system, a CSMS. It is much like an ISO 27001 ISMS, but for OT systems. And in 3.2, you have what's called a cybersecurity requirement specification. So a CSRS is how you document your initial security assessment. So you have things like what the system under consideration is, a zone and conduit model. If you do a gap assessment where you kind of benchmark yourself against other industry frameworks. Importantly, any kind of like specific legislative or policies and things that apply to you, and importantly, your initial high-level risk assessment. And that whole process together is basically a really, really good input to use in the design phase. And you should keep the CSRS updated through the life cycle of the industrial automation control system. So how to use them? So first off, I think use the thing that your company already uses, right? So if you've got an IT security program and it's NIST CSF, I'd suggest starting with that for your OT system because it'll help you kind of demonstrate what you're doing to close gaps. It'll help with reporting, all those kind of things. For those of you that are under SOCI regulations, you are no doubt more than truly aware that you have a CIRMP deadline coming up, and it calls out these 5 security standards that you can use as the basis for your risk management plan. So you can use 27001, Essential 8 Maturity Model, the NIST CSF, the C2M2 at MIL 1, which is the US standard, and the AES CSF as the V1 standard, the 2020-2021, at Security Profile 1. But if this is all too hard, just start with the NIST CSF, right? that's my takeaway. It's a common thing, everyone knows it, it's a good framework. So change management. So I love this quote, right? Everyone loves progress, but nobody loves change. Probably because it's just done poorly and done to you. So there are frameworks. There's ADCAR, which is awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement. There's also Cotter's change model. Definitely go talk to your change people. I sometimes struggle with this because I'm kind of change like positive, like I'm happy to lean into change, but not everyone has that same change appetite, right? And I think importantly, you need to think about like what people want to do. Try to actually understand how it impacts them, do like a change assessment. But I think most importantly, communicate. Communicate to the point where you're just sick of saying it, right? And I think communicate in different forums. Like some people, they want to read. Some people want a webinar. Some people want, an engraved tablet. I don't know. But people want different forms of communication, right? Full disclosure, I haven't read this book. It's on my Kindle to read list. But I thought I'd throw it up because I did some research. I also like the fact his name's Jason Little. But I think it's a good resource and on my to-read list. So knowledge management. So I'm actually a huge knowledge management nerd. At PwC, I was actually a knowledge manager. I believe that just meant I was a glorified PowerPoint deck redactor. But it's really important to understand how you're creating knowledge and how you're managing knowledge. So knowledge management is the process of identifying, organising, storing, and disseminating information with your organisation. And I quite like this blurb from IBM, right? So companies with knowledge management strategy achieve business outcomes quickly, they increase organisational learning and collaboration, and importantly, they make decisions faster across the business. So just some tips for KM. People have different learning styles. I like to learn things before I need it. That's not normal. Most people want to learn stuff when they need it. So the idea is making it easy for them to get when they need it at a teachable moment. The other thing too is you've got to make it easy to find and share, right? The more you can embed knowledge management into just how you normally do work, better outcomes, right? And this one really speaks to me. Knowledge management's really about connecting people with knowledge, right? It's not just, hey, here's a giant document library, or hey, here's like all the standards on a network share. It needs to be about how do you easily know who's really good at stuff and know their experience. And there's really cool systems one of my friends worked on where, when they're building really big project bids, they can understand who has capability, who's worked with people, and even start to think, hey, what are the emerging knowledge skills we need? Some really good takeaways, just thinking around, hey, how can you make knowledge management self-serviced? I love this kind of line of lessons learnt versus lessons experienced. So, I'm guilty of this. Hey, hasn't this already happened to us? Yeah, it has. Okay, we didn't learn from that. Communities of practice, which I'll touch on in a sec, and just how to transfer best practices. So if you haven't, would really recommend this book, The New Edge in Knowledge. I actually got a get abstract summary of it, and I've actually been reading it. The thing I really like about the book, not only has it got the framework, it has some really good case studies in the back of how, say, IBM and different companies actually manage their knowledge in their systems. So communities of practice, a fantastic way to share knowledge. I'm actually really chuffed. Normally, every company I go to, I just make a Teams group about OT security. And I made one for CyberCX, and I'm still getting people adding me to LinkedIn saying, hey, I found all your stuff on the Teams group at CyberCX. So, if I made like webinars and stuff, I just put them in there. But just really great way to make that social knowledge sharing, right? So it creates that space for people to connect and to share. And I think it's also an excellent forum for people to do teachbacks. Oh, 2 minutes, okay. I'll go faster then. But for teachback, so if someone does a training course, get them to come in to do a teachback, right? It's really good. And if you don't know where to start, just make a Teams group. Really, really easy to do, right? Finally, document management. So you will be making a lot of documents, right? And for MIL 2, you want to be able to show how you've got the right stakeholders and the right engagement. If you've got a document management system, use metadata, right? And most importantly, when you're making changes, update them to your community of practice. So summary, we'll whip through this quick. Understand how to use programs to deliver change. Make sure you're really working on your relationship with your sponsor, and it's super key to remember it's a partnership. Remember, the right framework can really help you show progress and give structure. Change is hard, so make sure you invest in your change management strategy, and you'll be delivering a lot of knowledge, so make sure you're managing it. And I like giving people homework, so next week, go start a community practice. Just make a Teams group, right? Work with your sponsor. Figure out how they communicate. Maybe grab a coffee, just have a chat. Hey, what's working, what's not working? This is my favorite. Go plan a site visit. Next month, go do something in person and social with your community of practice. By this point, you should know the right OT framework and start launching your knowledge base, right? So start making it searchable, making it easy for people to use. Next 3 months, do your gap assessment, and then really bed in your change management. So that's me. Thank you. I'm sure we have time for like one question, but this is like 7:40, so. Anyway, so thank you for your time. Thanks, Dalton. Nice.
Thank you so much, Bruce. That's been bloody awesome.
Yeah, thanks, man.
I think I've rushed you a little bit. We do have some time for a few questions. We've got one so far. So just a little FYI, if you've got questions, fire them down. But we've got one from Alison saying, would you use or apply the same framework for both IT and OT within the same organisation, or would you use different frameworks?
Yeah, it depends. So I'm a huge fan of SABSA, right? So SABSA is an enterprise security architecture toolkit. I think what's good is having framework integration. So if you use, say, NIST CSF for your entire company program, 62443 is an informative reference in, similar to AES CSF, where 62443 is an informative reference. So I think something like 27001, you will struggle in OT. So I think there are some frameworks that integrate better, but I think importantly, if you choose a different framework, figure out how they can actually integrate with each other. So I think I'd say whole of org, NIST CSF or AES CSF gives you flexibility with 62443 just for OT. Yeah.
Have we got any other questions coming through? I'll ask one myself.
Oh, please.
As a bit of a standard policy nerd myself, I'm a big NIST guy. There's also only so many times I can read the word personnel before my brain does start to melt over a little bit. What's your favourite place to go for frameworks and policies?
For like templates? Or
just your favourite one. Like, what gives you the best vibes?
Oh, look, I really like in the NIST's I don't know what's called, but there's like this NIST informative reference tool. So in this CSF v1, it was like a PDF in the back with all the cross mappings. In the new NISTs, there's actually like a dynamic tool that can show real-time mappings. Otherwise, there's this really good spreadsheet from, I can't remember what it's called, it's like syscontrols or something like that. But it's like this giant spreadsheet that maps all other frameworks to each other. That's quite useful. Otherwise, it's probably just like being on mailing lists is actually quite good. So I'm like on the SANS advisory board mailing list. So I just normally just search like what I need to look and good stuff pops up. But I think the other thing too is just like having a good network of people and like, you know, like people message me, hey Bruce, like what do you reckon about this? I think sometimes it's good just to have people you can bounce ideas with. Yeah. I think we had a question. Yep. Yep. Yeah, no, it's a great question because we don't really have, you know, one global, this has to be the standard, there is flexibility. Yeah, no, well, look, I think NIST CSF is great, right? Because I think what's good about NIST CSF, it was designed to not be a prescriptive control framework. It helps with ideas, concepts. So you should be able to make a mapping of all other frameworks back to NIST CSF. What I'd probably say is for whatever your other frameworks are, or standards, maybe just have a look at those to see how they just map back to NIST CSF. So when I do documents for AES CSF, in the appendices, I tend to put how does this document map to these practices? And I find that really useful for audit because former auditor, like if someone gives me that list, hey, this is useful, thank you, versus I'm relying on someone reading the docs, which is not, yeah. But I'd probably say like NIST CSF, I think is just generally the best lowest common denominator. In Australia, if you're in energy, AES CSF is given as common terminology and framework. But I think if you're global, AES CSF gets tricky, right? But it is just C2M2. So it's a great question because especially if you're buying people, because you have no ability to influence. So. Oh, yep.
Bruce, this question I see, if the project's got formally registered engineers,
yep.
they tend to go IEC 62443.
Yep, yep.
If I see other ones like smaller things like maybe waterworks and council,
Yeah.
you've got some manager and they go this maybe.
Yep.
Can you comment on is that just professional preferences? Or is
Yeah. So what's... Yeah. Yep. Yeah. So as a registered engineer, we enjoy what we call prescriptive standards. So a standard that was developed by other engineers to give prescriptive guidance on how to do something. That's why most engineers will steer to 62443. I think, you know, IT people, we tend to not have prescriptive standards, right? We have more frameworks or references. I think what's good though in that scenario is 62443 is an informative reference to NIST, right? And I feel like if you just go make a big spreadsheet and start mapping the 62443 concepts with the 27001 concepts, there's a really nice marrying for ISO 27001, which is probably most of the stuff the security manager cares about. But in 62443, with security levels and security requirements, it's a bit more familiar to engineers who write specifications and write, you know, the system shall, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's more just, I think it's more just a common feeling, like a, what's the word I'm looking for? Like it's a familiar feeling of like, hey, this looks sensible, whatever. But happy to have a chat further because I think it's a really good point that we don't have common languages, right? And I think this CSF is the best thing we have to a Rosetta Stone of everything. So on that note, I think I'm probably at time. I don't know.
Are you going to be around?
Oh yeah, I'll be on the beers. So if you want to come talk about, if you want to get nerdy about frameworks.
Bruce isn't going anywhere.
Yeah.
So yeah, could I get another massive round of applause for Bruce?
Hey, thank you. Oh, thanks, Dan. Hey, really appreciate that. Excellent, thank you.